What if I told you that in one of the richest countries on earth, owning a home is becoming a luxury instead of a milestone? What if I told you that the average first time home buyer is pushing 40 years old and millions of young adults are quietly moving back into their childhood bedrooms? Here's the uncomfortable truth: this isn't an accident and it isn't temporary. I've spent decades watching how systems scale, technology, markets, governments, and when something breaks at scale, it doesn't break loudly, it breaks slowly until one day everyone feels it at once. That's exactly what's happening with housing. We're short millions of homes. Interest rates punish first time buyers, and every year we delay fixing it. The gap gets wider, rent goes up, hope goes down, and an entire generation starts asking a dangerous question: what's the point of working hard if I'll never own anything? And this isn't just about houses, it's about stability, families, the future workforce, social trust. And here's what really surprised me: the solutions being discussed right now are bigger, riskier, and more controversial than most people realize. Some could change everything, others could make it worse. By the end of this video, you'll see the housing crisis very differently. For a lot of young adults today, buying a home doesn't feel like a delayed dream. It feels like a completely unrealistic one. You can do everything right: go to school, get a job, work long hours, save diligently, avoid reckless spending, and still feel like you're running on a treadmill that never moves forward. Wages have risen, yes, but not at the same speed as home prices, rent, insurance, taxes, and everyday living costs. What used to be a starter home now feels like a luxury asset. And what used to be a reasonable down payment now looks like an impossible mountain to climb. Add student loans, high rent that eats into savings, and interest rates that punish first time buyers the most. And the math simply stops working. I've watched markets evolve for decades, and one thing is always true: when the numbers stop making sense for hardworking people, frustration turns into resignation. That's what's happening here. People delay marriage, delay kids, delay stability, not because they want to, but because the system quietly nudges them into it. Even those earning above average incomes feel locked out. Watching prices rise faster than they can save, and the psychological toll is real. When an entire generation starts believing that ownership is out of reach, it changes how they think about work, ambition, and the future itself. This isn't about laziness or poor choices. It's about a structural mismatch between income and opportunity. Until that gap is addressed, buying a home will continue to feel less like a goal and more like a fantasy. When people talk about home prices, the conversation usually stops at one word: demand. More people want homes, prices go up, end of story. But that explanation is far too simple and honestly a little misleading. The real problem sits on the other side of the equation: supply. For years, we simply haven't been building enough homes to keep up with population growth, job mobility, and changing lifestyles. Construction slowed after past economic shocks, and it never fully recovered. On top of that, zoning laws, lengthy permits, environmental reviews, and local opposition have quietly turned building a home into a slow, expensive, and risky process. Every delay adds cost, and every cost gets passed down to the buyer or renter. And then you layer in higher interest rates, which don't just raise monthly payments, they reduce buying power overnight. A home that felt affordable 2 years ago can suddenly feel completely out of reach, even if your income hasn't changed. Investors also play a role, especially in hot markets. Buying homes as assets rather than places to live, tightening supply even further. But here's the key insight most people miss: no single factor caused this. It's a chain reaction. Fewer homes built leads to bidding wars. Bidding wars push prices up. Higher prices lock people out, forcing them to rent longer. Higher rents make saving harder, and the cycle feeds itself. I've seen this pattern in other industries. When friction piles up at every step, the end result looks like chaos, but it's actually predictable. Until we address the structural barriers that limit supply, home prices won't come down in a meaningful way, no matter how badly people want them to. When you hear a number like 10 million homes, it sounds abstract, almost exaggerated, but it's actually one of the clearest ways to understand why the housing market feels so broken. Think of it this way: every year, new families form, people move for jobs, immigrants arrive, and young adults try to live independently, but the number of homes available simply hasn't kept up with that reality. Over time, that gap didn't just grow, it compounded. Missing a few 100,000 homes one year doesn't seem catastrophic, but repeat that mistake year after year, and suddenly you're millions behind. That's where we are now. And when supply falls that far short, the market doesn't stay fair. It turns ruthless. Buyers compete against buyers, renters compete against renters. Prices don't rise gently, they jump. I've seen similar shortages in other systems I've studied. When demand consistently outruns supply, access becomes privilege. What makes housing different is that you can't opt out. Everyone needs a place to live. Building those missing millions isn't just about pouring concrete and hammering nails. It means land use reform, faster approvals, skilled labor, financing, infrastructure, and political will. All working together, miss one piece and everything slows down. That's why this problem hasn't been fixed already. It's a complex, unglamorous, and slow, but ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It makes it more expensive. Every year we delay building at scale. That 1 0 million home gap quietly grows wider, pushing ownership further away for the very people the economy depends on. Until we treat this as a long-term supply problem instead of a short-term affordability issue, the math will keep working against everyday people. So this is where the housing conversation gets uncomfortable because the answer isn't as simple yes or no. Government has the power to fix parts of this problem, but it also has a long track record of unintentionally making things worse. I watched this dynamic play out across industries. When policy moves too slowly, innovation gets strangled. When it moves too aggressively, markets break in new ways. Housing sits right in that danger zone. On one hand, government controls zoning, permits, infrastructure, and financing rules, levers that directly affect how fast and how affordably homes can be built. Used wisely, those tools can unlock supply, lower costs, and speed up construction. Used poorly, they create bottlenecks, raise prices, and discourage builders from even trying. The challenge is that many well intentioned policies focus on protecting what already exists rather than enabling what needs to be built. Layers of regulation may feel safe, but every added rule slows timelines and increases costs. And those costs don't disappear, they land on buyers and renters. At the same time, doing nothing isn't neutral. Inaction quietly favors those who already own property while locking out newcomers. The real question isn't whether government should be involved. It already is. The real question is whether it can shift from controlling outcomes to enabling solutions. That requires discipline, humility, and a willingness to measure results instead of intentions. Housing doesn't need more promises, it needs smarter execution. And if policy focuses on speed, scale, and supply without distorting incentives, government can be part of the solution. If not, it risks turning a crisis into a permanent condition. The phrase housing warp speed sounds dramatic, almost unrealistic, but that's exactly why it's gaining attention. The idea is simple. If we can move at unprecedented speed during a crisis, why can't we do the same for housing? I've seen moments where systems that normally take decades to change suddenly move in months when urgency is clear. What makes housing different isn't the lack of solutions, it's the lack of momentum. A warp speed approach doesn't mean cutting corners on safety or quality. It means cutting through delays that serve no real purpose. Today, it can take years just to approve a single project before a shovel ever hits the ground. Financing drags on, permits pile up, local disputes stall progress. Each delay quietly adds cost and reduces how many homes actually get built. A true warp speed mindset asks a different question. How do we align incentives so builders can build faster, cheaper, and at scale? That could mean standardized designs, faster approvals, coordinated infrastructure planning, and clear national priorities. I've watched innovation explode when rules become predictable instead of restrictive. Speed creates confidence, and confidence attracts investment. But here's the caution: speed without strategy can backfire. If acceleration benefits only a few players or ignores long term planning, the results won't last. The real opportunity lies in combining urgency with discipline, moving fast but with a clear goal, dramatically increasing housing supply where people actually live and work. Done right, a housing warp speed moment wouldn't just ease prices, it would restore belief that big problems can still be solved. When traditional solutions stop working, unconventional ideas naturally move to the center of the conversation, and housing is no exception. Proposals like 40 or even 50-year mortgages, portable mortgages that move with you, and entirely new financing models are gaining attention because they promise one thing people desperately want: lower monthly payments. On the surface, these ideas sound practical, even logical. Stretch the timeline, reduce the monthly burden, and suddenly ownership looks possible again. But after decades of watching financial systems evolve, I've learned that every creative solution comes with trade offs. Longer mortgages don't make homes cheaper, they make them feel cheaper month to month. While increasing the total cost over time, portable mortgages could add flexibility, but they also introduce complexity and risk that the average buyer may not fully understand. New models can help, but only if they're transparent and responsibly designed. The danger is mistaking financial engineering for real affordability. If supply stays limited and prices remain inflated, these tools risk becoming pressure valves rather than fixes, relieving pain today while increasing dependency tomorrow. That said, innovation shouldn't be dismissed. Some of the biggest breakthroughs I've facing came from rethinking outdated assumptions. The key is balance. These ideas should be guardrails, not crutches, tools that help people bridge gaps, not stretch themselves into lifelong vulnerability. The real question isn't whether these models are good or bad, but whether they repaired with serious efforts to increase housing supply. Without that foundation, even the smartest financial ideas become temporary illusions instead of lasting solutions. When 1 in 3 young adults are still living with parents or relying on roommates well into their 30s, it's not a cultural trend, it's an economic signal. Independence hasn't suddenly become unpopular, it's become unaffordable. Rent absorbs such a large share of income that saving for a down payment feels impossible, and buying a home feels irresponsible rather than aspirational. I've watched this pattern emerge in different economies. When housing blocks independence, life milestones start stacking up behind it. People delay moving out, delay relationships, delay children, and delay putting down roots. Over time, that hesitation reshapes society itself. Living at home can be a smart short term strategy, but when it becomes a long term necessity, it reveals a system under strain. The emotional impact matters too. Young adults want autonomy, privacy, and a sense of progress. When those are postponed year after year, frustration quietly builds. It also changes behavior in the workforce. People take fewer risks, switch jobs less often, and settle for stability over growth because losing income could mean losing housing. That dampens innovation and mobility in ways that don't show up immediately in headlines. Families feel it as well. Parents support adult children longer than planned, stretching their own finances and retirement timelines. This isn't about blame or failure, it's about structural pressure. When housing no longer supports the natural transition into adulthood, it sends a clear message. The system is out of alignment. Fixing housing isn't just about buildings, it's about restoring momentum, independence, and confidence for an entire generation. Housing has quietly become one of the most powerful political issues of our time. especially for blue collar and working class voters. For decades, the promise was simple: work hard, play by the rules, and eventually you could afford a place of your own. So when that promise breaks, frustration doesn't stay personal, it turns political. I've seen this pattern repeatedly. When everyday economics stop working, people stop listening to abstract debates and start demanding practical answers. Housing cuts across ideology because it's not theoretical. Rent, mortgages, and property taxes show up every single month. For blue collar workers, the pain is often sharper. Rising home prices push ownership out of reach, while rising rents eat into paychecks that haven't kept pace. Commutes get longer, communities get fragmented, stability slips away. That creates a rare political opening. Whoever can speak clearly about housing without jargon, without finger pointing, has the chance to connect with people where they actually live. This isn't about left versus right, it's about who understands the pressure families are under. I've learned that messaging only works when it's grounded in reality. Voters don't want speeches about markets or theories. They want to know why they're working harder and getting less and what's going to change. Housing has become a trust issue. Address it seriously and you earn credibility. Ignore it, and no amount of cultural or partisan messaging will fill the gap. The opportunity here isn't just electoral, it's generational. Fixing housing could restore faith that the system still works for people who build, serve, and keep the economy running. Economic headlines often feel distant, but inflation and interest rates reach directly into people's lives, especially when it comes to housing. When inflation runs hot, central banks respond by raising interest rates, and that single move ripples through the entire housing market. A rate increase might sound small on paper, but for buyers, it can mean hundreds or even thousands more each month. I've watched this cycle many times. The moment rates rise, buying power drops instantly. Homes don't suddenly get cheaper, but mortgages do get more expensive. That gap locks people out faster than almost anything else. Even those who qualify for a loan hesitate because the long term cost feels overwhelming. Recent inflation numbers matter because they shape expectations. If inflation shows signs of cooling, it opens the door for rate cuts or at least stability. And stability alone can change behavior. Builders plan differently, buyers regain confidence, markets breathe. But here's the part most people miss: lower inflation doesn't undo past damage overnight. High prices and limited supply don't disappear just because one report looks better. Housing reacts slowly, like a heavy ship turning course. What matters is direction and consistency. I've learned that markets run as much on confidence as on data. When people believe conditions will improve, they start making long-term decisions again. And when they don't, everything freezes. That's why every inflation report, every rate signal gets scrutinized. It's not about winning a news cycle, it's asks about whether families feel safe committing to a 30-year decision until inflation, rates, and housing supply move in the same positive direction. Affordability will remain fragile. No matter how optimistic the headlines sound, there's often a wide gap between housing and economic news as discussed in the media and how it's actually experienced by people on the ground. Headlines swing between panic and celebration, one week declaring disaster, the next claiming victory, while everyday reality barely changes. I've learned that media narratives are designed for attention, not for long term understanding. They focus on short term numbers, political wins, and dramatic conflict. But housing doesn't work on a news cycle, it works on a life cycle. Families don't make 30-year decisions based on a single report or a talking point. They make them based on whether things feel stable, predictable, and fair. When the media treats slight improvements as major breakthroughs, it can feel disconnected, even insulting, to people still struggling with rent, debt, and uncertainty. At the same time, constant negativity creates fatigue and paralysis, making people believe nothing will ever improve. Both extremes distort reality. What actually matters rarely trends. Zoning reform quietly passing, permit timeline shrinking, construction starting or stalling, lending standards tightening or loosening. These details don't spark viral debates, but they shape outcomes. I've seen how dangerous it is when perception drifts too far from reality. If people are told things are great while their situation worsens, trust erodes. If they're told everything is hopeless when progress is possible, momentum dies. The real impact of housing policy isn't measured in applause or outrage. It's measured in whether someone can move out, start a family, or stop worrying about next month's rent. Until media coverage reflects lived experience more honestly, viewers will have to learn to read between the lines. So, where does this all lead? The next phase of the housing story won't be decided by one policy announcement or one economic report. It will be shaped by a series of quiet, cumulative decisions. What matters most now is whether leaders focus on long term supply instead of short term optics. Watch what happens at the local level. Zoning changes, permit timelines, infrastructure investment, and whether building actually accelerates in places where people want to live. Those details tell you far more than speeches ever will. I've learned that real change usually looks boring before it looks successful. Another key signal is consistency. One good inflation report or a single rate cut won't fix housing, but a steady direction over time can slowly rebuild confidence. Pay attention to whether builders feel safe investing again and whether first time buyers start re entering the market, even cautiously. That's when momentum begins to shift. Also, watch how new financial tools are introduced. Are they paired with education and safeguards or rushed out as political talking points? The difference matters. For viewers, the most important thing is staying grounded. Housing cycles are long, emotional, and often noisy. Don't let extreme optimism or constant doom distort your judgment. Focus on fundamentals: supply, affordability, stability, and opportunity. I've seen enough systems evolve to know this. When people start believing progress is possible, behavior changes first, then markets follow. Housing won't be fixed overnight, but it can be fixed deliberately. The question isn't whether solutions exist, it's whether we're willing to commit to them long enough to let them work. That's the story still being written, and it's one worth watching closely. If this topic hit close to home, don't just listen. Talk back to us. Drop one honest sentence in the comments. What's the biggest thing stopping you from owning a home right now? And if you want to go deeper, watch our previous video. It connects directly to this one and fills in the missing pieces. We put a massive amount of time, research, and heart into these videos. So if you found value here, support us. Subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it helps us more than you think.